Hello, I'm Jeremy. I hope everybody's holding up well during the quarantine. But today I'm going to be talking about a new game by the name of Jubako. This is a tiling game designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, very famous designers. It is a family weight game for ages 8 and up, plays in about 20 minutes or so for 2 to 4 players. It's put out by Ravensburger. They have a multilingual edition. I ordered this from Amazon.de, but it does have English rules in the box, and the game components do not have any language requirements. It's all abstract shapes. The game is a tile-laying game that is themed around constructing a Japanese bento box. So it's a pretty appealing theme, but it's definitely an abstract game at its heart. Players are simply going to be drawing tiles with various shapes on it and trying to arrange those shapes in order to score the most points. I'll take a few minutes to show you how the game plays, and I will come back and I will let you know what I think about the game. Jubako is a tile-laying game about constructing a bento box, and each player is going to be given a board which they'll use to lay their tiles on, and on that board there's going to be a grid, and depending on which side of the board you're playing on, the grid is going to either be 4x4 or 5x5, and every player is going to get the same grid, and all players are going to use the same side. It's just up to you which side you want to use. The 4x4 grid being slightly more challenging. And the way the game is going to work is after each player gets their grid, they'll draw 2 of these tiles. These tiles are going to show abstract shapes on them, which are meant to represent the various ingredients that you would put into a bento box. So I suppose this must be like a rice cracker, maybe this is seaweed. It's all in the instruction book, but I don't recall off the top of my head. So each player is going to draw 2 of those tiles and keep them in secret with them. And you'll set 4 tiles up in the center of the table with the rest of the tiles. The number of them depends on the number of players that you have, will be put face down. And on your turn, what you're going to do is draw a tile, either one of these that's face up or one that's face down. If you draw a face up one, it'll get replenished. And then you will simply place one tile into your grid and do a scoring. So, for example, the rules for placement, let's say this player takes this tile here. One will come out to replace that for the next player's turn, and then they have to place one of their tiles into their grid. So the placement rules are very simple. Any tile could be placed on either the blank spaces at the bottom of the bento box or on top of any pre-printed symbol on it or previously placed tile, so long as at least one of the 2 halves of the tile matches. So for example, this tile here could be placed here on blank spaces, or here, anywhere along the blank spaces, or it could be placed so that it would go here or here, or this side could match here. So again, only one of those 2 sides needs to match. So this might be, for example, the player's placement. Maybe they do something like this, and then what they're going to do is they're going to pick one of these 2 sides and score all of the symbols that are visible on their board of that type. So, in this case, whichever side they pick, there'd just be 2 visible. So let's say they pick the yellow and they would score 1-2 points. And that is really the crux of the game, is essentially you're going to be placing a tile and then you're going to be scoring. So as your bento box progresses, let's say this player, places this one here, then later, with another placement, they would be able to place, for example, this one here, matching up this symbol on top of this symbol, or they could put this one this way like this, and then again, they would just pick one of these to score. If ever you're able to place it so that the 2 shapes both match what you're playing on, let's just say this was a squiggle here and you placed that on top like this, or for, and they both match, you would score normally, but you would also get a 5-point bonus for matching the tile entirely with the spaces that you're placing it on. So that's a nice little bonus that you could get over the course of the game. Each one of these tiles, I believe, I haven't gone through them all, is unique. So you'll never be able to just place a tile flush on top of another tile to get that bonus. It'll always require you to place across 2 previously placed tiles in order to score the bonus. And that is really the crux of the game. It's really that simple. You just keep playing, placing one tile, picking one of the symbols to score, until all of the tiles have been placed, including the 2 tiles that you have in your reserve. And then at the end, whoever has more points wins. So that is just the basic version of Jubako. The game does come with some variants that you could choose to add in to kind of give you more variety from game to game. So there are 12 tiles that show the 12 different shapes that are available. One suggested variant is that each player draws 1 or 2 of these, and then at the end of the game, you'll get a point for every symbol of that type that's showing on your board. So just a little goal to go for. Another thing that you could do for a variant that's suggested in the rulebook is at the end of the game, on each level of tiles that you have, you could pick one symbol and score a point for each tile of that type for the level that you're on. So for example, any of the pre-printed things that are still there are worth 1 point, and then you could pick a symbol on this level and they're each worth 2 points. Up one level, a symbol, each of them would be worth 3 points, and so on, depending on. So that would encourage you to stack higher. The game also suggests that you could play with the scoring rules so that you would score more or less points for getting a perfect match when you're placing a tile. So the game is relatively straightforward, but it does have a little bit of flexibility in the rules in determining how you want to play, and the game does actually play out differently based on the way that you play those rules. Alright, so that is Jubako, and this is a perfectly pleasant family game. I think that the fact that it's designed by Kramer and Kiesling made me made me really anticipate this game, but it's really more a straightforward game and less deeply strategic game perhaps than Azul, which is Michael Kiesling's famous game from the last few years, and even a game that he published last year called Miyabi, which seems like a spin-off, as well as the other Azul follow-ups that have come out. All of those feel a little bit more complex than what you're getting in this game. That's not necessarily a knock about the game against the game. It's just simply a statement of fact. This is a really straightforward tile laying game that's definitely aimed at a family audience. I find it perfectly pleasant trying to maximize my points each turn, and there is some definite planning involved in, because you're able to hold multiple tiles from turn to turn, trying to set up situations where you're going to get the bonus points for making an exact match. Often it takes a turn or two to set that up, and that's satisfying when you're able to do that. So the game is enjoyable as a puzzle. It's just relatively straightforward. Because of the coronavirus outbreak, I've only really played this 2-player, and it plays perfectly fine at 2-player, although there is some sort of hate drafting at times, because if a player has a lot of symbols showing on their grid, you have to make sure that they aren't going to be able to score that again, so you might want to take tiles that enable them to pick that symbol to score again. So I think that might be reduced, I assume, with more players, but again, I've only played the game with 2 players so far, but I have played it with several of the variants that are included in the game. I'm somewhat of a mixed mind about those. To a certain degree, I definitely prefer playing on the smaller 4x4 grid, because it forces you to go vertical more quickly, and that's a good variation, just to have that bigger grid, which is easier to place on versus the smaller one. That does significantly make the game feel more complex, all things being equal, but the different variants are suggested in the scorebook for the way that you could change the scoring for getting a perfect match of a tile, or the way that you could change the end game scoring. When I was reading through those and when I've been playing with those, I'm not sure that I quite see which of those is the preferred way to play. And to a certain degree, the game feels a little bit underdeveloped or undercooked to me, because the straightforward part, the most straightforward form of the game, is probably a little too simple, but the more that you add into the game, I'm not sure that it ever gets to a point where it's as complex as, say, Miyabi with its expansions added in. So it's neither here nor there. It's very flexible in terms of how complex you want to make it, which is, I think, appropriate for a family game, but it almost feels like there's an element missing, even with all these variants. When I've stacked them all in there and tried playing with various different ones, I haven't found like the perfect setup for the game, and that might just be something that I need to play. But I have to say that even with all of those plays, the game has still been enjoyable. It's perfectly diverting. It's just, I doubt I would necessarily choose to play this over Miyabi, which is a game that I like a lot from the same designer, or Azul. Yeah, so this does, I think, sit in the shadow of those games. I know that the same designers have another game coming out which uses similar, domino type tiles called Read Nature, I believe, coming out later this year. So they're definitely making a lot of games in the similar mold, and this is just to be clear on the simpler side of those. So I think there's an audience for it, but I think you need to know that you're part of that audience. Production-wise, everything's fine. One thing that I'll note is that we tend to play with these Scrabble racks, or these card racks, I guess. But a Scrabble tile rack would work well. I wish those had been included in the game because you're supposed to keep the tiles that you have secret. And that's hard to do with the way that these are constructed. They're just relatively flimsy little plastic tiles. They don't really stand up on their own. So if they were thicker, that would work. They stack fine on top of each other on the board, which is the important part. But trying to keep these secret, it's you have to like put them down and flip them up to look at them, or have a rack. I just wish the rack had been included. And I guess the only other thing that I would say as a mild complaint about the game is that I feel like whoever's the last player ends up having a bit of a disadvantage. They simply end up having to take the last tile available at the end of the game. They don't have any choice in the matter. Any player who comes before them in turn order would get some choice. It's probably just going to cost them maybe a point or two. But in a game that's relatively tight scoring, that could be the difference. I feel like maybe there should be some sort of compensation, like you start with an extra point or two for going later in turn order. I should mention, I guess, also that if ever you can't place a tile, like if none of the tiles that you have a legal placement because you don't have at least one matching symbol on your board that could be stacked at on a level, you just discard a tile out and lose a point. So that could happen definitely at the very end of the game. You end up having to draft the last tile, which you'll never be able to place, and you'll just get a negative point, whereas the other player has a choice at least in which tile they get. So very minor complaint, I guess. That's easy enough to house rule. Ultimately, this is a game that it maybe didn't live up to the hype in my mind, comparing it to the designer's previous games, but it's perfectly pleasant. I've enjoyed my plays of it. Again, I've only played it 2-player so far, but it is pleasant and enjoyable. It's definitely more thinky than it looks. I know that the rules explanation is super simple. You just place a tile and put it on to score, but there is a decision to be made in whether you're going to go after those bonus scorings or whether you're going to try to have one symbol visible a lot on your grid and score it as many times as possible, which does put you at the risk of being dependent upon that symbol coming up in order to continue to score it. So there are definite decisions here. There is a little bit of thinkiness, and I think that for a family weight game, it's perfectly fine. Maybe not as engaging as I have found some of their other games, but that's a very high bar. Those are some of my favorite games of the last few years. So those are my thoughts on Jubako. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for watching.